On today's podcast, we're talking about the return on investment of all of this developing people and culture stuff and how positive business performance and metrics actually follow the culture and not the other way around. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason, and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you are coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you are here. We are in Season 7, which means we are up to nearly 200 episodes recorded. So glad you are with us. If you're somebody that's been with us from the very beginning of this, so glad this continues to add value and contribute to your life and work. And you continue to show up, and hopefully each of these episodes are resonating with you and continue to, because you keep showing up. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. So glad this continues to grow, spread, reach far places. So welcome, welcome, welcome. My commitment to you, as always, is this will be a place for you to step back, to think, hopefully to have a little good oxygen breathed into you, but also to be able to think about the temperature that you're trying to set in your own life and work, and have some time to think about it and reflect, and then be filled with a couple of actionable next steps so that you can put that into practice. So before we dive into today's podcast, if you'll do me a quick favor, of course, if you'll stop and just rate the podcast. So 5 stars, of course. Hopefully that's what you'll rate for the podcast, as a whole, and then any individual episodes that really resonated with you, I hope you'll rate them 5 stars. Obviously, anytime you have a chance to leave an authentic review, your own words about what resonated with you and why it was, contributed to your life and work, that's always helpful. That's how the algorithms work, to help share it with more people so others can see that. And then anytime you invite others to listen, share it with your colleagues at work or your team, or, hey, let's listen to this and then talk about it, or, share it on social media. All of those ways help amplify the message further into the world. And that, of course, is the goal. So thank you to everybody that takes a moment to do that. So on the last few episodes, we've been focused on, the Surgeon General last year, declared that workplace culture is at a health crisis in our country. Mental health challenges have certainly been up. In the latest episode that I just did, we talked about how studies are showing that workers have never felt lonelier than they do in the workplace today. So all of this stuff that we've been talking about has been colliding with the reality that research also tells us that what people are asking for in the midst of the Great Resignation and all those other research and things that have been alarming to us, all the other metrics, it also reveals that employees want more, they want more meaning in their work life. They want to feel like they belong. So they want more meaningful work cultures. They want to feel like, if they've never felt lonelier, we know they also are telling us they want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they contribute. They have an ability to contribute their gifts and their skills, and the organization that they work for actually cares about them as a human being, and that their life, and that they know that they're also, the organization not only cares about them and the life that their employee wants to have, but also that they're going to help them develop. And all of that helps them feel like they're part of a mission that's greater than themselves, that they are co-creators in growing a mission and a healthy operation. So we know that's what people are saying, and research is telling us this is not only what people have been experiencing, but this is what people want. And all of that is wonderful, and I think most people will agree that we want humans to feel that way. But some of the biggest skeptics out there would say, yeah, but I hear this, people ask me this a lot. What's the ROI on all this culture stuff? Which I always think is a funny question because not only do we know the research is telling us this is what people want, and we also know that most humans say, hey, if I have a team organization, I want my people to feel this way. But then we want to ask the question of, but what's the ROI on this culture stuff? So how does it link to our performance as a company or our profitability as a business? Well, the short answer is, what's the ROI on all this developing people and culture stuff? Massive. Massive is the short answer. I'm going to give you the longer answer here on this episode. But on today's episode, we'll share more examples of what I mean by this. But what's the ROI on performance and profitability for your business for all this developing people and culture stuff? Beyond it just being the right thing to do and what we want, what's the return on investment? Massive. So on today's podcast, we're talking about the return on investment of all of this developing people and culture stuff and how positive business performance and metrics actually follow the culture and not the other way around. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. If you haven't done so already, we hope you'll visit Amazon or Amplify or jasonvbarger.com to check out Breathing Oxygen, my new book that is all about breathing good oxygen into ourselves and mindsets that fuel ourselves and the teams and the organizations around us. Positive, healthy thinking is as essential to great leadership and building a winning culture as the air we breathe. Leading yourself and a team of people has never been more complicated than it is today. As a leader, every move you make is either breathing life into your organization or slowly killing it. The atmosphere can easily turn toxic with negativity, blame, and doubt poisoning the culture. Just like every being on the planet needs good air to breathe, every organization needs leadership that breathes life into its people to sustain the energy required to complete its mission. Breathing Oxygen focuses on 6 key leadership mindsets that breathe life into any team: clarity, inclusivity, mental agility, grit, rest, and ownership. Join us, read, and share Breathing Oxygen.
Available now from Amplify Books on Amazon and jasonvbarger.com.
So today we're talking about how developing people and culture actually leads to better and more positive business performance and metrics, and not the other way around. Sometimes people think, it's, the business metrics and just our quote unquote performance, our stock price, our profitability, all that stuff. That's the number one thing. And all this other stuff, how our people feel and all this culture stuff, that's extra. We'll worry about that after our hardcore business metrics. And the reality is that the studies show it's the other way around. If we are thoughtful about developing our people and culture, the positive business performance and metrics will follow, and it's not actually the other way around. I believe wholeheartedly that developing people and culture of how we work together in the world beyond just what we do is valuable enough on its own. So again, anybody that listens to this or reads anything that I've written or been at a keynote speech or certainly been a part of an organization that I'm helping with the ongoing development of leaders and culture, you would know that already. I believe in this work that developing of people and culture before anything comes of it is as valuable of not just what we do, but how we do it is not just the right thing and the healthiest thing for organizations to do, but it also is that it happens that positive business metrics follow. And so I want you to know that I believe wholeheartedly this is the right thing to do, but I also recognize that performance matters and outcomes matter. And we want to make sure that our throughput, the energy that we put through the organization, is producing the output that we want, and want to make sure that and understand that it is the throughput that produces that output. So if you're someone that needs some reassurance, which I know there are people out there that still, even in the midst of understanding maybe cognitively, or they in their mind, they recognize that developing people and culture and wanting people to feel good about the workplace is important. They also sometimes still need reassurance of how it connects to those business metrics and quote unquote, what's the ROI on all this developing people and culture stuff. So if you're someone that needs reassurance, then I'm hoping this episode is helpful to you. So there's been all kinds of research on all the stuff that we're talking about, and I'm going to bring up I'm going to highlight just a couple of things, and I'll put a link to an article too that lays some of this out as well, just for in the show notes for anybody that's interested. But the first thing I'll point out to us today is for the ROI on all this developing people and culture stuff is, one, great workplaces have higher retention rates. And in a world where almost every business and organization that I've been involved with over the last few years, there isn't a single one that doesn't cite the work shortage issue or finding good people. And oftentimes, they're also talking about, in the midst of the Great Resignation, the 47 million people that over the course of a year and a half or 2 year period all up and quit jobs. So retaining our best people, there is a massive ROI that comes with that. So the first thing I'll talk about is great workplaces have higher retention rates. So one of the things that we can look at is the companies that make, Fortune's 100 best companies to work for list. And again, you can extrapolate that out, that even if you don't make that, Fortune 100 list, but if you make one of these best companies to work for list, then each year those companies that make that list have about half the turnover of their peers. Half the turnover of their peers. And we know that turnover can be incredibly expensive. So here's an example that I read recently that for a typical hospital in the year 2022, losses in nursing staff cost them between $5 and $9 million. And so if we know this, and according to the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, which I've spoken at their national conference in Las Vegas, I've spoken at many different SHRM events across the country, but according to their research, the Society for Human Resource Management, they look at organizations across the country and around the world, but they say that an organization or a company spends an average of $4,700 per every new hire. So if you want to think about the turnover expense to trying to find new people, and especially in a world where attracting talent is big, the return on that investment is massive. So organizations that find themselves in that best places to work category, they have about half the turnover of their peers. The second thing I'll point out is that great workplaces have lower levels of burnout. Great workplaces have lower levels of burnout. And I share this with you in the context of a time where we know that the Surgeon General, again, over a year ago, named workplace culture as a health crisis in America, and that mental health is issues have never been higher, and that people have never felt lonelier than they do at work. And so the number two thing I'll point out to you is great workplaces have lower levels of burnout. And so if we're worried about productivity, or you're worried about this kind of quiet quitting that we've heard people talk about where employees don't quit, but they just kind of stop doing their job and hide until you find out, and they just kind of begin to look for other places, research would tell us that workplace stress costs the U.S. economy about $500 billion. $500 billion. And workers who report burnout, workers who feel like they are burnt out, that they're overly stressed, are about 2.6 times, more than 2.5 times, 2.6 times as likely to actively seek a new job. And they're 63% more likely to take a sick day and 23% more likely to visit the emergency room. So profits don't create great workplaces. It's the other way around. Again, the people create the profits, and healthy cultures of workplaces allow us to then have the workforce that we need to be profitable and to be effective. So only 16% of workers at a typical U.S. workplace, the research says, are what they call, quote unquote, thriving. And according to the Great Place to Work research, at those 100 best companies, 58% of employees report a high state of well-being. So only 58%, which means there is a tremendous opportunity to create a better high-trusting culture and relationship within cultures, more meaningful cultures together. So, 4 and 5 working parents at those companies they studied also, they saw that fewer were quitting or burning out because of the places they were able to, even double working parents were able to be a part of it when they were a part of a culture that wasn't burning them out in some way. So first thing is, great workplaces have higher retention rates, and we know there's a massive cost to turnover. And second thing is, great workplaces have lower levels of burnout, which I just shared with you, the massive cost, $500 billion that research says that workplace stress costs the U.S. economy. And the third thing I'll point out is great workplaces innovate faster. They innovate faster. And when employees trust their employer, they work harder, they contribute more, and drive higher levels of innovation and productivity. And again, in that same Great Place to Work research, the highest levels of innovation occur when every single employee is empowered to participate. Where part of that meaningful work culture is that every single person sees their job and whatever their role is to be an innovator and to find a better way to do what they do. As I listen to that research, I'm reminded of what my good friend and mentor, Howard Behar, who's the former president of Starbucks and Starbucks International, when he and his team took Starbucks from 15 stores, where nobody outside of Seattle really knew anything about Starbucks, to then growing them to over 15,000 stores around the globe. And he's been retired now for many years. But during that stretch, when Starbucks really blew up and became what that global brand that everybody knows, is that one of the things that Howard used to always say is the person who sweeps the floor gets to choose the broom. That part of their culture throughout the entire company was this innovation, this idea of, hey, no matter what role you might play, front line to the person that actually sweeps the floor, I want you to innovate and find a different and better way to do it. You get to figure out, you get to pick the broom, you get to come to us and tell us what's the best way to clean these floors or keep this restaurant clean. And we're going to empower you to innovate, and you lead in this. One of the really great examples that comes from Starbucks that I remember him telling me about came from one of his district managers, a district manager that oversaw a store, but Dina Campion was her name. And she once came to the leadership of Starbucks, and here's somebody just at the local store level comes to the leadership and says, hey, we've been playing around with this drink idea that we're calling, that's a takeoff on the Frappuccino. And at that point, Howard Schultz, the founder and CEO of Starbucks, had said, no, we're not going to do things like that. We have very specific products that we're going to do. And he had this list of all the things that Starbucks would never do. And yet, as they started to listen to the frontline people that were coming up with these innovative ideas, finally, Howard Behar, again, the president at the time, said, let's give this a try and let's try it out. Well, Dina's idea that came from that kind of local level of innovation by all turned the Frappuccino at one point in Starbucks's history. It became 20% of their business, which equated to about $4 billion worth of sales. And so that innovation by all was something that permeated everything throughout their company and their culture. And so great workplaces innovate faster, and obviously performance follows. The fourth thing I'll point out is great workplaces rebound faster from a recession. So you may be thinking that, yeah, of course, in good times, everything goes well. And certainly this makes sense that good cultures produce better results. But even in a recession, the research tells us that those that are more meaningful, better work cultures actually end up thriving and rebounding faster from that recession. So of a group of 69 companies that researchers identified as quote unquote thriving, during the recession from 2007 to 2009, they didn't follow the same 35.5% stock decline of the S&P 500 from that 2007-2009 that most experienced. They saw actually an increase of 14.4%. So, and then after the recession, these thriving companies continued to beat expectations. The S&P 500 recovered from 2006 with about a 9% gain by February of 2014. So in that time from 2006 to 2014. But the thriving companies from that 2006 to 2014, the thriving companies gained 35%. And so when you look at the data and you start to see, again, these best places to work, these cultures that are considered thriving, where their employees feel like their minds and hearts are engaged in the work, doesn't mean everything's perfect, but they are better to navigate their way through challenging times. And research would tell us they will rebound faster from a recession. The last thing I'll point out is the fifth thing is that great workplaces have higher stock returns. So you may just say, again, back to that just stock price, they have higher stock returns. So Edmunds analyzed the history of the 100 best companies lists from 1984 to 2009. And they controlled for firm size, industry, past returns, and many other variables. But Edmunds demonstrated that companies on the list, again, on that 100 best companies list, outperformed the stock market by 2 to 3% per year. With the best organizations seeing their revenue grow 550% faster than organizations that were not. So thinking about this and treating employees well doesn't just correlate with higher stock returns. It predicts future performance. It helps us show that organizations that are seen to be these places that people can thrive, their minds and hearts are engaged, and that they are part of a more meaningful work environment are the ones that also produce greater results. So it makes me, again, in the culture shaping work that I do with teams and organizations, I'm always talking about the culture shaping tenet that what we allow lingers. So the behaviors, the operations, the policies, the way we lead that are counter to creating the culture we want, those things that we allow to kind of linger that are counter to what we want, those fester and become the culture. And yet these organizations that have clarity around what the culture is they're trying to create, they get better at identifying the behaviors, the operations, the policies, the structures that they might be allowing to linger, and then they get relentless about, well, what are the new behaviors we need to teach differently to trigger a different and positive chain reaction. And so triggering of that is teaching new habits, new behaviors, new operations, new policies, and creating that work environment so people can thrive, that their minds and hearts are engaged. And oh, by the way, if you're somebody that needs a return, or you need to understand, well, what's the return on this investment? As you can see from just these few examples, the return is massive. So, some questions for you to ponder as we leave today's episode. What is your intentional strategy to articulate and proactively lead your culture? To articulate and proactively lead your culture. Does your company, does your team, does your organization have clarity on how you articulate the future culture that you're trying to create? And then what is the proactive strategy to lead it? What is your retention strategy? And how to engage with your key folks, the people that you can't afford to lose, and so that, again, you can engage their minds and hearts in the future of your team or your organization. And what's your development strategy to anchor the culture you want and breathe oxygen into your culture into the future? I hope today's episode got you thinking in many new ways. If a deeper dive into any of these is helpful to you, or if you have other ideas of content or topics that you want us to dive into, I hope you'll share that with us. info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com, and let us know, and we'll continue to design content that, helps you meet you where you are. And lastly, I hope you'll go back and listen to old episodes or some of the ones that I referenced on today's episode to connect the dots. There's so many great, episodes and topics out there that I hope it will engage your mind and your heart. Cheers to the path ahead, and remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We have an opportunity to get clear on the temperature we hope to set and for ourselves and also for the culture that we're trying to create, and then be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain our path forward and help us be even more successful with all the business metrics or organizational metrics you have. So step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.